In Africana studies, there are a few different ways that they think about topics. One of them is through the lens of the social structure. The social structure means it's like, who are Black people to everyone else? That's social structure. Versus governance structure, which is, who are Black people to each other? It's two different questions. And if you consider like who's writing the book, is the social structure writing the book based on what's happening over here? Or is the governance structure writing the book based on what's happening within itself? I think critically, if you're an intellectual, if you're studying this form, I think it's an important question to ask: who's the source? Where are they coming from? What cultural experience are they putting on top of this, research? Yeah. If I want to engage in classical music as a tap dancer, as a percussive dancer, there's a certain, in order to respect the values of that culture, there's a certain approach that I'd have to take that's different from the approach over here. It's saying something that if I were to do, because I have done this, Air by Bach. You hear that? Bach. I practice that. Air by Bach. So there's this band called the Class Brothers. I think they're a Cuban band, and they did like this classical record with an Afro-Cuban feel to it. And so they added this Afro-Cuban feel to Air, and every time that the venue is the gig is appropriate, and we got musicians, I'm like, let's do the Bach, and it just has this response every time. But I'm approaching it from an African aesthetic or an African value system because of what the Class Brothers put underneath it in terms of that percussion. But without that, if I'm just doing Air in that cultural context, I'd have to approach it from a completely different, perspective is what I mean. Yeah.
Well, like you're in a classical setting and the whole audience knows the piece also.
Yes,
right.
Yes.
And exactly how it was composed and intended to sound, and they've heard it by all the masters over and over again, all the greats the same way, right? And I feel like when you are listening to jazz and you're going to hear jazz, you're going to be involved with jazz, you also know the songs and you know the tradition, but you're like, ooh, what is this person gonna bring to that song I know? It's like, oh, they've transformed it, but it's still that bass line, not the actual bass line, but the bass line of the song is there and you recognize it. I need to add one thing for the record. It's very important to me that it's said. Yeah. There's a lot of work to be done, a ton of research still to be had, but the queer erasure in jazz is absolutely out of control, in history in general, but in jazz, like, we're just not there yet. People are not ready to hear the impact of queerness in the whole history of jazz, especially queer Black women, and the influence at the absolute root of it all. Like, we're talking New Orleans, we're talking Black blues, queer, lesbian, bisexual singers who, like, paved the way for an entire genre of music, and who, if you read their books about them and if you watch the documentaries, they omit the queerness. They're literally singing songs, blues songs about women, sing as women about women, and it's written in the history books that it was about a friend, or that's not what really happened. And there's so many queer jazz musicians in history who had to hide and, to be safe. But to this day, even now, with so much queer liberation happening, and as a queer woman, I'm grateful for that, but there's so much work to be done in jazz history. We need to see that we've been in history, And I just wanted to say that on the record because it's so important. know that the general structure of a jazz tune looks a specific way, right? So commonly, we have 32 bars, and we have different sections, and then we have an A section, and then normally another A section, and then a B section, which is different than the A sections, and then it comes back to the A section at the end.
Yeah.
And we have different endings that can be figured out on the fly.
Yeah.
How do you know which one is gonna happen? Well, you gotta know them all first.
You gotta know the rules.
You gotta know the rules. So how come I can show up to a jam and not know the song that is being played, but I can actually be involved and sing along? What are some of the rules?
I've got rhythm, I've got sunshine. Like, you gotta have rhythm.
Yeah.
Be on the beat. The down beat.
There's like this exercise that I don't remember who brought it up first in terms of tap teachers that I've learned from. But it's all about swing and discovering the swing and understanding the swing.
Swing. Buzzword.
Swing. Ta 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 do bam de zip do zip do gam dum dagi ba da oh. It's a vibe that's very it's a feel that's very specific, and I'm gonna try to explain it this way. So if I've failed. Let me talk about my failure. So I love jazz. I'm raised in jazz. My teacher Ethel Bruno raised us with this is how we she'd scat the rhythms to us. She'd say bebop da bop, bebop da bo. Like there's no way that you're not understanding what the rhythm is with this woman in the cane. The cane is tapping on the 2 and 4. Bebop da bop. Like you're getting the vibe, the feel of this music. Now. I learned the dance. I learned how to improvise. I'm learning how to improvise, we'll put it that way. And I'm in the situation where I'm now tap dancing to salsa music. I'm in this salsa situation where I think I can just 2 and 4 it all day. And no, it's different. It's a different feel. It's different, and I have to train to get to this point where I can just let loose. If I can't just let loose, then I have to employ, I guess, a technique that I learned from jazz. It's actually a core value of jazz, which is listen.
It's very, very hard to explain what swing is through music theory. And I've heard it explained in a variety of different ways using actually different notation. And people argue about this, and there's a lot, because it kind of lives somewhere in between something. There's a magic that happens when you have a bass 4 on the floor, right? You got a walking bass. So you have every beat. Maybe a little skip. Right? And this is the foundation. You got this driving bass. But that in itself, it doesn't necessarily move forward if there's no little skip or something to indicate that we're going forward. If you're just driving those beats, right, you're in it. And it could be heavy. It's gorgeous. Love that. But it takes something else to move it, to have that motion that jazz has, and that's that ride cymbal. There's a magic that forms when you have this happening with this. at the same time, that is the feel that creates that forward motion. That is a feel, right? So can swing really be taught through theory? No, I don't think it can. I think you have to be there. I think you have to feel it. You have to be in the room, and you have to hear it by the greats, and you have to listen to the recordings, and you play along with the recordings over and over and over. Jazz is not an easy music. I think it's really important to say that as well. Like, yes, it's inclusive. It's about community. It's about being able to jump in. But to circle back to what we discussed earlier, you can't just jump in. You gotta know how to hang. And that's where I think that, honestly, I think swing and swing feel is magic.
There's kind of like a two-part to it, right? Like you talk about like you gotta hang, and being able to hang comes from like a practice of rigor, but be able to approach it with ease, like rigor and ease. And we talk about listening. When I listen, and we talk about being in the pocket, I'm actually a little behind the pocket. Like that's how I listen. So I'm not exactly on top of the beat. I'm in it, but I'm a little behind, and that's where I'm swinging it, just underneath the underneath. So as I'm listening and I'm dancing and I'm connecting, it also means I have to hang back. Like it's such a fine line, because I don't want to be off the beat. Baby, if you're off the beat, it's a chop. It's a chop. So I got to be behind the beat, so still in beat and still connected at the same time. You have to be in the space, you have to be in the room, it has to be felt, you have to be inside it, it has to be in your blood. It has to be all of those things. When you talk about like teaching swing, it has to be felt and felt.
As we come out of this pandemic, moving forward, I'm looking for a hole in the wall. A hole in the wall, yes, where we can invite some people to be in there, but I'm really just interested in being in the music and vibing in a way that's beyond a jam. It's like, it's a church. It's transcendent. I want to serve the thing that comes alive when everybody's in the pocket and agreeing to a specific feel, and then the synergy happens. That's where I want to be. I think the audience, I would love to welcome them, but I'm not there in my process yet. I'm not there yet. I want to be, for sure, but I want to work on nurturing the thing that refuses to be named. You can call it jazz, but it's inaccurate. It's inaccurate. Yeah.
That leads me, to be curious about the separation that has happened of dance and jazz as well, social dance, as well as audiences playing together. Something that drives me nuts when I'm an audience member is when I watch jazz musicians face each other, but there's an audience.
Yeah.
But there's a truth to that, because jazz is a thing, and they're playing for that synergy, but then you're watching it and you're not in it with them.
Yeah.
So how do we both keep that thing, but also open the thing? I'm talking a lot of conceptually, but I think you're.
I hear that, because I thought the same thing when Travis said that. I was like, can both
exist? Can both exist? Yeah.
Like, can people watch us cook a pot together, and then we eat it, and we didn't serve them? We didn't serve them what we cooked, right? And I'm literally thinking of this, like, I think about it like in Grenada, where my family's from. You have this big Dutch pot where you cook oil down. You have all the ingredients. Everyone's cooking. Everyone's putting all the meat and all these different things together. We cook it. We eat it ourselves, but we didn't give any to our neighbors or to anyone else who's watching. Is that what we want to do? We want to cook. We want to cook the meal. We want to put the ingredients. We want to like add the salt, add more pepper, like figure it out, add the flavors, and then eat it ourselves, but not necessarily serve it to others potentially.
What if you serve it to others? What if you were to make the pot, right?
Yeah.
You cook it the way that it's meant to be cooked.
Yeah.
And then you give people samplers, and it's up to them if they want to eat the pot, if they want to eat the soup, they want to eat the stew, they want to eat the food, then they're there to eat that and experience it and be there to experience what's happening on that stage. But is it up to them to tell people what ingredients should be changed or what should be in it?
I think you know, it comes back to the question, who are we to each other? And we're talking about a music that was born during a time before film, television, records, even radio. And so what that means is, if you wanted to have a good time, listen to some music, dance, you had to go out. You couldn't experience that in your home. You couldn't press play. And so the sense of community was very, I think, I would imagine more well-defined. You know, I would imagine the way you greet someone is a lot more well-defined because we're doing it a lot more and it's so important. The people that are there experiencing this cooking, they're all participating in I guess, taking it in, if they're there to do that. If you know, if they're not tourists, you know, if they're part of the culture.
It don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing. I do ba. It don't mean a thing. All you got to do is sing. I do ba.
The whole point of Jazz United was to, you know, unite the music and the dance and make it one. Not two, this, just one thing. And sometimes we achieved that and sometimes we didn't. But when we did achieve that, and there's that synergy that you speak of, was like absolute fire, absolute magic. That was the stuff. That was the sauce. That was the pot that you speak of. And like, I think a big thing, just to also just bring a bunch of the stuff that we've already talked about into this conversation, is like, what an honor it is for me to have a taste.
Excuse me.